Men, and I use the term ever so loosely. Hey, it was like Christmas over here yesterday. UPS guy came, got a lot of stuff. This box is the one I'm interested in. This guy right here. That's got what I hope is going to be all the parts in it to finish this. The Harton trans. I got the trans on the bench. Let's open the box up and get the goodies out and get ready to put it together. I've been buying parts from Eastern for a long time, and they always come in the same kind of box. The tape used to seal the box up says Eastern all over it. The box, however, is a Massengill douche box. How in the hell does a motorcycle place end up using Massengill douche boxes? And they've been using these boxes for years. I just don't get it. There's got to be some kind of an explanation. What it is, I don't know. But anyway, Eastern parts come in Massengill douche boxes, believe it or not. Looks like I got it all. Theoretically, I got everything I need, I think, just sitting right here. I've test fit this thing, the gears, many times with the old countershaft third and the old main shaft. I'm going to have to test fit everything again with the new parts now that they are here. A couple of the things I change are these springs. I found a lot of these broken, and these are rusty. They're worn on one side. It's going to break here eventually. Of course, it's been, what, 57? This is a 59 engine. So these things are 70 years old. 75 years old. Yeah, they're getting retired. Gonna swap the main shaft over. This particular snap ring is really a giant pain in my balls. Getting this thing off is, geez Louise, I screw with this for 20 minutes probably. They're just hard to get off. It's some tough steel, very springy. It just don't ever want to move. Anyway, it finally yielded. Okay, I'm getting close to finalizing this assembly. And I don't know if the mic will pick this up, but see if you can hear this. You hear that? That's actually kind of an interesting thing, and I run into that on a lot of these transmissions. The shifter forks. Right in here, the tail of this shifter fork is hitting the countershaft second gear. And this only happens when the bike is in fourth gear. So we'll shift it down to third, and I'll show you what happens. Getting my dogs lined up. When you shift it into third, the gear moves over, and the shifter fork is no longer in an area where it could rub on the countershaft second gear. Not a big deal. We're going to take it apart one more time. And I've had this apart and together, you know, at least 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, checking clearances and stuff. So we're going to sand a little off of the end of the shifter fork right here. Right here, you might be able to see a little bit of a shiny area, which is where the countershaft third gear was rubbing on the tail of this shifter fork. So we're going to hit it with the Dremel tool standing drum and just kind of smooth this off a little bit and take a little bit off of there. It'll be fine. I've covered transmission assembly in other videos, so I'm going to kind of skip over a lot of it, but I'm going to give you the quick, down and dirty, easiest way to put one together. First, you drop the countershaft gear cluster in. Next, I like to put in the first and second gear shifter fork. I put a little grease on the top hat to keep it from falling off while I'm assembling the thing. I use a socket extension to simulate the shifter shaft, and I put the shifter cam in the neutral detent. Next, I set the third, fourth shifter fork into the groove on the shifter cam plate and line it up with the 1-2 shifter fork. And then put the shifter fork shaft through both shifter forks and into the hole on the trapdoor. Once you got the main shaft second gear in position, you could grab the main shaft cluster and slip it into the trapdoor. You got to jimmy the splines around to get it to line up a little bit. You wiggle and a jiggle, wiggle and a jiggle. Oh, come on. There we go. And in it goes. And that's it. I have found this is by far the easiest way to assemble one of these transmissions. After I get it put together, I use my socket extension to shift it through all the gears. You do have to rotate the shafts to make sure that the dogs on one gear align with the slots on the adjacent gear. Otherwise, it just won't go into gear. It's not unusual to kind of have to help it a little bit when it's just sitting on the bench. That's normal, perfectly normal, and it won't be an issue when it's installed in the engine and the engine is running and everything is spinning. It'll work just fine. All right, I'm going to do a final check of the spacing between the shifter dogs and the adjacent gears. I tap the end of the shafts with the mallet to make sure they're fully seated against the trapdoor, because if they're not, you won't get an accurate result when you go to check the clearances. Right now, I'm looking at the problem issue, the clearance between the countershaft third and second, and the clearance between the countershaft third and fourth. And I got even spacing on both sides, so this is good to go. I did have to adjust the countershaft low gear shim to get the correct clearance on that, and this is ready to go. Getting ready to install the trans. Going to change the shifter shaft seal. This is how you do it without removing the cam cover. Just pry it out of there any old way you can. Any old way you can. There you go. Okay, this is how I install the seal. I got a special tool I made. You stick the seal over the pilot on the end of the tool. You stick the tool and the pilot in the shifter shaft hole. You run the driver in through the bushing and the cam cover into the hole on the tool. And then you give it a couple of smacks with the hammer. It results in a perfect installation every time. All right, one last look inside the trans cavity. I'm going to put the gear shift shaft in. And if you recalled, in the take-apart video, I commented that the boss on the gear shift shaft would hit the crankcase and it would need to be ground flat on one side. So I've grounded flat, and it now fits just about perfectly in there without having to force it past the edge of the trapdoor opening. Of course, the ball on the shifter shaft has to line up with the slot on the ball carrier. I find that the friction of the seal on the shaft keeps it positioned wherever I want it to be. Okay, here's the trans going in for what hopefully will be the last time. By the time it reaches this point, I probably have had this thing in and out of there 5, 6, 7, 8 times while I was checking and adjusting the countershaft thrust washer shim and the main shaft thrust washer shim. So I think I got it where I want it, so I'm going to shove the trans in there, bolt it down. Quite frequently, it takes some wiggling and jiggling to get everything to line up correctly. But with the right combination of wiggle and jiggle, eventually it does line up and eventually it pops right in there. After I get it tightened up, I give it a spin. If the thrust washers on either the main shaft or the counter shaft are too thick, you won't be able to rotate the shafts. I reach into this hole on the bottom of the trapdoor with something hook shaped, and I'll grab and I'll push and pull on the counter shaft first gear, which is a check of the end play on the counter shaft. I do this by feel. Theoretically, you could rig up something with a dial indicator, but then you're trying to have the dial indicator plunger and the something to push and pull on the counter shaft all shoved in that hole at the same time, which really gets to be problematic. The other thing you could do is pull that steel plug right above the hole out, and then you could put a dial indicator on the end of the shaft. I just prefer not to do that. And, I've done enough of these, I could tell by feel that I'm down to the correct amount. As a matter of fact, the Harley manual tells you to use a bent spoke to push and pull on the countershaft. Moving over to the other side of the motor, I'll grab a hold of the main shaft and I'll give it a push and a pull. And once again, just by feel, judge whether or not it's within limits. The book says 4 to 9, I do believe, and really that's just barely perceptible. A lot of these things, I'll grab them, initially when I take a motor in, and Jesus, the free play is like 30, 40 thou on them. Most of them have way too much. Okay, shoving the rollers in, all 23 of them. One at a time. I grease them up a little bit and shove them in the hole. Not much to it. Just make sure they're clean when they're going in. And I'm going to spare you watching all 23 of them go in. Giving it a spin to make sure everything rotates freely, and giving it a last little end play, a push and pull check, just to make sure it's all good still. Installing the main shaft bearing washer. If you recall from the disassembly video, this washer was on the other side of the rollers. This washer goes on the outside, like this. Installing the snap ring. This snap ring is really kind of a pain in the ass to get in. It's kind of like that other snap ring on the main shaft. Very tough steel, very springy. The best way I have found to get them in is to get like one side of it started, and then you could just kind of tap it around with a hammer and a screwdriver, or a hammer and a punch, and just kind of work it in a few degrees at a time. Can be a pain in the ass. You work at it, eventually you'll get it, and it'll just pop in that last little bit, boom, and you're good to go. All right, going to give it one more trip through the gears up and down just to make sure it still shifts. You will have to rotate the shaft to help the dogs line up. It's normal for it not to go in if the dogs don't line up, so you must rotate it in order to get it to shift. So this one is good to go. Okay, measuring the hole where the shifter fork shaft goes through the crankcase. You can't buy this part, so far as I'm aware. I don't even see it listed separately in the Harley manual. So if you knock this out, you're going to have to get one machined. I'm going to machine one up about, I don't know, 2 thousandths bigger than the hole, so I get a nice tight interference fit. Okay, installing the little plug I made. As it so happens, the little titty left over from when my parting tool wasn't on center comes in handy for grabbing it. So, I'm just kind of test fitting it, and it won't fit, which is good. We're going to slobber it up with some green Loctite and go ahead and knock it in, and then we're going to stake it. So it should be good to go. Okay, here's that new improved cover plate I made to replace the chewed up aluminum one that used to be on the transmission. I'm countersinking the mounting holes so that I could put screws in there that'll be flush so the heads won't get knocked off by the too wide O-ring chain. Installing the non-stock countershaft bearing cover plate. I think I said in the disassembly video that I believe it was installed because that bearing was leaking. So generous Loctite 518. These threads are marginal at best, so being careful not to strip them out. Got a little grease on the mating surface for the seal. I did a few things off camera. Kickstart shaft in, new nut, lock tab bent over, safety wired, the pawl carrier bolt and the spring, the detent plunger screw together. I safety wire them instead of using the lock tabs. Put the kickstart ratchet gear on. Of course, these bolts are all tight. They hold the tranny on. And this is kind of interesting. As you would expect, the oil pump check valve is leaking and the crankcase is filling up with oil. Well, oil's been dripping out of here and oil has been dripping out of the sprocket shaft for quite a while, and there's been a little puddle. I just wiped it off so the puddle's not gone. But anyway, oil's not coming out of here, so the oil level is somewhere between the bottom of the sprocket shaft bearing and this bolt hole, okay? So there's this much oil in this thing. If the bike were to continue to sit here for a long time, eventually all the oil in the tank would seep through the oil transfer valve and fill up the primary and fill up the transmission. And I remarked when I took this thing apart that the clutch basket was full of oil and that they usually stay pretty dry. One of the places the oil comes from is right here. These holes, there's 3 of them, 1, 2, 3. And those are slingers, and they're drilled through to the inside of the clutch basket, and they come out behind the seal in this area. And this seal I just replaced too. So if the crankcase and the primary fill up with oil, and the oil gets above the level of one of these holes, the oil will seep into and eventually fill up the clutch basket. So, you got to drive them every so often or take some kind of measure to make sure you don't allow the primary to get full of oil. But anyway, that is, I believe, how the oil that filled this up got in there. Anyway, that's what I think. So hopefully this owner won't let it sit that long, or he'll drain the oil out of the trans or something, or drain the oil out of the tank, something to keep oil from oozing out of the transfer valve hole. In any case, at this point, we're ready to start putting the primary together. once I get the sprocket in and the oil seal meets up with the sealing surface on the back of the sprocket, the only place oil will be coming in is through the transfer valve. The two holes for the primary adjuster are going to be filled with a bolt here pretty quick. And as you recall, this had fallen apart. I got a new shoe bent on there. I don't mind tapping a little bit, but I would not go into full-scale wail on it with the hammer. You risk damaging the sprocket shaft and probably throwing the wheels out of true if they are true. And the locks only really need to be finger tight. Okay, nuts bottomed out. And we're going to leave it right there. Alright, I got an O-ring rounded up. We're going to put the nut on the clutch hub. So I've got to lock the hub to the basket so I can tighten the nut up. And it should fit. There it goes. And the locking mechanism is nothing more than some old clutch plates loosely bolted together. I like to bend the tabs on the ears on the lock tab up so they're easier to grab. And we're going to put just a little grease around the inside to help the O-ring slip in without cutting it. Okay, the nut's bottomed out. We'll give it a little grunt. And that'll do it. And the lock tabs are bent over, and this could come out. And this could come out. Ah, I suck. Okay, there it goes. And this could come out. Okay, the chain is good right there. Very often the chain is not even. It's not worn evenly, so there'll be loose spots and tight spots. So after I get it on there, I like to give the engine a couple of revolutions. See over here, it's looser. and over here it's a little tighter. But anyway, better, you don't want it too tight. A little bit loose is probably better. Could cinch down the adjuster nuts. Okay, this thing is getting a new clutch. The steel plates were warped, and the fiber plates have been soaking in oil for the past, I don't know, decade or two. And there's no way a friction material could soak in oil for a couple of decades and still be a friction material. And of course, they don't fucking fit. Son of a bitch. And I run into this a lot. I'm going to have to take a Dremel tool or a file to every one of these grooves because I think the ends are a little mushroomed over. Yep. Be back later. That actually wasn't too bad. Put a deburring bit in the Dremel and just went through all of the valleys, about I don't know, 15 minutes worth of work, and the result is that the plate fits smoothly. So we could stack the rest of them up in there. And I assume that's from people hammering the clutch hub on. You see, and this clutch had one of those real thick bottom plates. And now you can't get all of the plates to engage the splines. So this is all going to come out again. You know, and I ran into this problem on another motor a couple of builds ago, and I saw that thick plate on the bottom here, and I was wondering whether it was going to be a problem or not. And yeah, it is. You know, maybe this clutch could run with one less fiber plate and one less steel plate. I don't know. But I've got another standard backing plate here, I hope. And you could see how thick that is. Let me try to find what's supposed to be in there. Okay, so here is what was in the bike. And here is a standard stock 900cc dry clutch backing plate. This has got to be at least twice, maybe 3 times as thick as this. This will work, this won't. Okay, and then there's the releasing disc, but first we're going to put the clutch rods in. Okay, this one's got 4 rods. One I already shoved in from the other side. I never remember the order they go in, I always got to look it up. Long, little tiny short one. And then the last one that engages the releasing disc. There we go. I'm going to go on the other side and push on the rod, and this should move. There we go. And as they all do, well, maybe not all of them, but a little crack over here. I'll put a couple of gobs of weld on there. All right, ran a couple little beads. And I don't see a timing mark on this hub. Huh, interesting. That looks a little off. I'm looking to get the studs centered in the holes. That looks a little off. And that looks a little off. That's pretty close, but a couple look a little off. That's definitely off. I think that's it. Okay, I got the little top hat in the notch over here, so that's good. Studs are all centered, all the plates are in. Time to put in the springs. And I got mismatching springs. Jeez, please. I'm going to leave the mismatchers in there. These three are a little bit longer and a little bit heavier. And these three are a little bit shorter. Going to put the ones that are a little bit longer on the nuts with the shoulder on them. The bigger nuts. Okay, and the book says 3/16 from the edge of the cup to the inside of the disc. Fortunately, the guy who cut these off, boy, just barely left enough stud. Well, we'll call it good to go. This part of this project is rapidly drawing to a close. Derby cover, all rusty. I usually sandblast them and prime them. I use a little bit of the ultra black. I just put sealer on one side. Primary, pretty much back together again. I'm not going to put the cover on until after I get the timing set. There's some weird noises coming from this engine. That noise I was talking about before. Something doesn't sound right. I got a little curious about that, as you might imagine. You listen and see if you could hear it. I'm not quite sure how good the mic will pick this up, but listen. Hear that click? Hear that click? Click again. Click again. I mean, that might not sound horrible, but it's not right. I'm going to do the down and dirty compression test. When I get done rebuilding an engine and I stick my thumb over the spark plug hole, the engine will blow my thumb off. I can't contain the compression. no such problem on the front jug. The back jug has some compression. The noise to me sounded like it was valve train noise. Watch these lifters. Now watch these lifters. Yeah, the wheels have fallen off the cart, so to speak. The train has jumped the track. In case it's not obvious to you in the video what's going on, I'm going to show you. You know, this happens pretty quick in the video, and I'm using a pair of pliers just so my fingers aren't in the way. Look at the play. Look at the play in this lifter. And that clicking noise is as the valve comes up and the roller goes over center on the cam. What you're hearing is this banging back and forth. So front intake, front exhaust, not quite as bad, but still pretty bad. And you know, if these are this bad, what does the rest of the inside of the engine look like? It can't be good. So here's the rear intake. These are supposed to have, according to the manual, I think a 1/2 thou to 1.5 thou clearance between the guide block and the lifter. You know, you can measure this with a ruler. The rear exhaust isn't horrible. Well, yeah, it is. It's horrible too. But geez Louise, that's as bad as I've ever seen. The real low compression really doesn't kind of bother me because it's been sitting around a little bit. If you've got any rust on a valve face at all, it'll ruin your compression. And I would suspect that if it ran for a little bit, the compression will go up. But you know, you can't start up an engine like this, so at least I don't think I should. Anyway, this is going to be a problem. This thing needs some major work. I'm going to leave it up to the owner what he wants to do. I would be scared to start this up, let alone drive it around. The owner says that it ran as recently as 2 years ago and that it seemed to run okay. I have a hard time believing, with as much free play as I see in these, that it didn't throw a push rod out the side. But anyway, on hold, waiting for the owner to decide what he wants to do with it. Just a quick reminder, you can help support and grow this channel, first of all and most importantly, by hitting that subscribe button. So if you haven't subscribed already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If you'd like to do a little more, join me on Patreon. Links down below. So go ahead and join me on Patreon if you feel so inclined. And finally, coffee cups, stickers, and gas tank covers are available. This is a new design coffee cup. I like the old ones, but I like these new ones even better. Links will be provided in the description down below. Get yourself some. And thank you all ever so much for watching these videos. I really appreciate it. Bye.